He appeared to be just another calm rancher. Old boots, grizzled hands, a man who talked only when required. However, when Silas Ward noticed his maid hobbling across that morning in the kitchen, anything that would cause the sheriff's office in its entirety. The ranch home was situated as though it had been cut in the valley, from the actual ground, all worn wood and hard work. Silas had constructed 15 years ago. He did it himself. Each beam is positioned with equal care. Pay attention. He put everything he had into his life. Simple, hard things were what he believed in. Labor, paying fairly, and honoring your commitments. The type of individual who offered assistance on wants and never inquired about where they originated. Mercy Whitmore appeared 3 months ago, having in hand her eyes were filled with despair. Young, perhaps 20, with the sort of worn-out appearance that discussed issues that were beyond her years, she required labor. He required assistance in maintaining the home, and that was sufficient arrangement for the two of them. She didn't talk to anyone. Done a good job, and Silas appreciated that. According to his observations, those who spoke less were more valuable. Hearing it when they eventually opened their oral cavity, however, this morning was distinct. Silas arrived from examining the livestock and the boots that are heavy on the wooden porch. As soon as he saw her via the window, Mercy was in motion. Like the expense of each step in the kitchen something for her. She dragged her right leg somewhat, and each few seconds she'd pause, holding on to the table's edge or a chair back, agony tight in her face. She was attempting to conceal herself. He remained still, for a while, observing through the glass. He hadn't done this before. Observed something strange about her motions. However, it was considerably worse today, the way she gave preference to her left side, the cautious manner in which she lowered herself to get a spoon that had fallen. It brought to memory how his former horse had moved following a severe fall. It hurts, but Silas pushed, trying not to show it. The creaking of the hinges through the door, their well-known salutation. Mercy straightened right away, attempting to calm herself down, but he had already noticed sufficient. Her face turned white, and he noticed something in her for a moment. Eyes that tightened his chest. Fear not of him, but yet be afraid. She returned to the stove and stirred a pot of coffee while making motions that were also too controlled, too cautious. "Good morning, Mr. Ward. The coffee is about ready." Her tone possessed the same lightness and drive that he'd heard from animals that were hurt. The sound of anything attempting to persuade the world when it was obviously not, it was okay. His hat was hung by the peg by the door and looked at her back. How she supported her shoulders, the little shudder and she grabbed for the coffee with her hand cups, it all told a tale she wasn't aware of. All set to share. However, Silas Ward had already spent enough years to read weather signs, animal behavior, patterns, and the subtle language of the region to determine when there was a severe problem. And whatever was going on with Mercy, it was getting worse. Whitmore. She was asked if she was harmed by a mishap or if someone was injured intentionally. Additionally, if it was the afterward, Silas would have to determine the true nature of his character. Silas took the cup of coffee from Mercy's shaking fingers and hands, brushing hers for a brief instant. Even though the skin felt heated, he sensed her recoil in the kitchen at the contact rather than someone's response shocked, someone's response anticipating suffering. He drank some of the coffee, looking at her from the edge of the cup. She remained busy and kept her back. To him, herself with pointless duties at the counter, cleaning surfaces that had already tidy, rearranging objects that didn't require moving. The type of frenzied behavior brought forth by a desire to vanish without really departing the space. "Mercy," he murmured. Her hands remained motionless on the she had been wiping with the same cloth. The third time, the spot on the counter. It wasn't a simple, "Yes, sir, you're hurt." Both of them were aware of the question. The ensuing quiet spanned between like a sucked breath. Outside, there was a call from meadowwork from someplace in the separation, bright and carefree as its singing. In the early morning. Within the kitchen, all that could be heard was the gentle tick of the mantel clock, and the murmur of Mercy's breathing was erratic. When Silas finally looked up at him, he saw something that tightened his jaw. The left half of the lip was split, and the cut sufficiently fresh that it hadn't completely recovered. There was a yellowing bruise all over, by the way. Her cheekbone is largely buried. Her hair remained pulled forward. However, her eyes told him all he needed to know. Had to be aware. They had the drab resignation of a person who had halted, having hope that things will improve. She said the words. I fell. Too fast. I was clumsy. Stumbled and fell my own footsteps descending the stairs last night. Silas took a seat in his coffee cup with thoughtful attention to detail. He's heard enough falsehoods throughout life to identify the noise they produced. This one dropped on the ground between them, as empty as a grain silo. Show me these steps, he murmured. The face of Mercy turned white. The stairs you tumbled down, sir, down? Let me see them, she said. Her mouth then shut it once more. They both of them were aware that she remained in a tiny hut simply behind the main home. It was constructed on level terrain with a solitary ascending step to the entrance. Silas had constructed that cabin, just like everything else on his land. He was familiar with every detail of it. Like smoke, the untruth hovered between them, from an evidently bitter fading fire. Mercy's apron-clad hands twisted, and Silas briefly believed she might be honest with him. Rather, she raised her shoulders and holding her chin in a way that would have been commendable if it weren't devastating. I ought to return to my work, she said. Silas observed her turn. Once more, observing how she moved with the methodical, measured actions of an individual. Nobody could predict how much movement would cause suffering. Whatever had occurred to it wasn't the first time for her. The manner she carried herself and the manner she had practiced concealed her wounds. This was the conduct of a person who had discovered how to live by keeping silent and out of sight. However, as Silas and Mercy hobbled toward the pantry, Ward took a choice that would alter everything. He was about to discover who was causing harm to his worker. Additionally, when he did, that individual would discover what occurred when a man you crossed lived his entire life with the conviction that defending what was rightfully his wasn't merely accountability. It was a holy obligation. Now, the sole query was whether the reality would be more terrible than him, ready to manage. Later that day, Silas found himself acting in a way that he had never carried out previously. Observing his own property, such as a stranger could be hiding in the dark. He positioned himself close to the barn so he could observe the route from the town to Mercy's cabin, feigning to fix a damaged harness while his gaze followed each go throughout his territory. The sun was starting to move down toward the horizon as he noticed the rider coming. Even from afar, Silas identified the slouched stance and snarling entrance of Briggs, Deputy Vernon. The man rode as though he was the owner of all the land his badge touched the horse's hoofs, capturing the light of the late afternoon with every sway in the saddle. Silas had had little affection for Briggs. The deputy possessed a cruel streak that was as deep as a dry well, and a perspective on individuals as though they owed him money only for being there. He was a law enforcement official who preferred the power over the justice system, and the entire community was aware of it. However, being aware of it and taking action were two quite distinct things. Briggs dismounted and tied up close to Mercy's cabin. Silas had brought his horse to the post, put in place for guests. However, this didn't appear to be a formal visit of some sort. The deputy cautiously looked about, verifying that he wasn't being observed prior to rapping on Mercy's door. Hard enough with the back of his hand that the sound could be heard by Silas from 50 yards distant. The door nearly opened, instantly, as though Mercy had been awaiting. From where he stood beside the barn, Silas was unable to discern words, although he could clearly interpret body language. Briggs shoved through the door without being asked, and Mercy took a step back. Her stance was one of fear and submission. As the door shut behind them, Silas sensed he makes fists out of his hands. Each and every his instinct was to march over there, and resolve this as his father would have both with his principles and his fists. But he was slowed down by something. Perhaps it was the awareness that a conflict with a deputy might exacerbate the situation. For Mercy, or perhaps it was the knowledge that he had to comprehend precisely what he had previously been dealing with, he took action. 20 minutes went by. 20 long, the time that Silas wore a groove his pacing in the ground. His mouth clutched, until it hurt. As soon as at last the cabin door opened once more, Briggs first to emerge, he adjusted his gun belt. With the contented demeanor of a man who had received what he had come for, Mercy showed up. Over his shoulder at the doorway. Additionally, even from Silas could see from a distance that she was holding oneself in a new way. More agony cautiously. Briggs got on his mounted a horse and headed for the town without whistling a melody while looking back continued. The evening breeze as an insult. For a moment, Mercy stood in her doorway. Long time, a single hand pressed up against the frame as though she required it to remain erect. Then she returned inside and shut the door. Silas was standing there, in the encroaching darkness, fragments of an awful puzzle that fits perfectly in his thoughts. An overly powerful subordinate and a lack of conscience. A young lady without a place to go and a guardian her. He now understood Mercy's motivation for limping. What he was the question, going to take action. The following morning came with clouds hanging and was gloomy and heavy. Down like a blanket of wool across the valley. Throughout the night, Silas had gazed at his bedroom ceiling, his thoughts sorting through the options and plans. When daybreak arrived, he had made his choice. Mercy was discovered by him in the kitchen once more, making even more cautiously than the previous day. She didn't look him in the eyes when she brought his breakfast. When he saw that she pushed her hair forward to hide new bruises around her neck. Seeing them made a harsh, icy thing settled in his chest. His voice said, "Mercy, strong but delicate, I must ask you something, and you must inform me of the truth." With the coffee pot she froze. He was halfway to his cup. "Deputy Briggs, sir, he has been visiting this place, but hasn't he?" The coffee maker shuddered inside her. Hands. Silas briefly believed she may completely abandon it. When she eventually placed it on the table, her actions were shaky and unsure. "I'm not sure. What are you saying?" she muttered. I witnessed him visit your place yesterday. Cabin, and I saw your appearance as he left." Silas's voice remained calm. However, he was battling an inward wrath that threatening to devour him. How much time has this been occurring? Mercy's calm shattered like ice on a pond that was warming. Her shoulders started to tremble, and when she finally turned to face him, her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "You don't comprehend," she murmured, her voice shattering. "He works as a deputy. Do you think I'm better than him? Who will care? What becomes of a person like me?" Then the words came out quickly like water via a damaged dam. She informed him regarding visiting the town 3 months prior, fleeing problems in the east. Concerning how Briggs had initially noticed her day, putting her in the general's corner. Store that made promises that eventually became dangers. Regarding how he had made it apparent that he now owned her, whether she liked it or not. If I told, he said he would make sure I vanished, anyone. Claimed that these mountains contained minerals, where I would never be discovered. The voice became a whisper. He claimed to have completed it previously. Silas sensed something. He became quite chilly and still within. He was aware of Vernon Briggs's bullying behavior and a coward. But this was different, completely. This was blatantly nasty and easy. "Why didn't you leave town?" inquired. Despite Mercy's laughter, there's humor in it. "Where and with what funds?" He made sure everyone understood. "Will I go?" He had me protected. No one would employ me. No one would? Assist me, the only people who would even give me work. Silas slowly got to his feet, his hands on the table, flat. As he talked, his voice appeared to have a weight to it. "Fill the kitchen from top to bottom. He will not go. To no longer harm you, Mr. Ward, cannot. He will either kill you or receive the sheriff to take you into custody for something that failed. These men look out for one another. However, Silas was already in motion, heading toward the door, his thoughts free for the First time since this entire catastrophe began. He hesitated, placing his hand on the doorframe, and turned to face her again. Something that you should be aware of, Mercy Me. I've never had much interest in conversing, but I've always been excellent at ensuring that the appropriate thing is finished. He went outside into the gloom. Mercy was left staring after him in the morning, fearfully and with something that could have been wary of optimism in her eyes. The stroll, it would take him an hour to get to town. That given him enough time to make a choice. Just how he intended to manage Briggs' Deputy Vernon. Additionally, one way or another, today was the last day of this. Cedar Falls, the town, was situated in a dusty basin situated between two hills. Its major thoroughfare dotted with structures that had witnessed better times. Silas strolled along in the middle of that street with the constant gait of somebody who has reconciled with what he had to do it. He was spotted. They did whenever Silas Ward visited the area. Since he only traveled when it was important, he precisely located Deputy Briggs, where he anticipated, resting against the emblem and post outside the saloon gleaming in the dim morning light. It's loud enough for half the street to hear, to learn that he had run into a destitute soul out of town the previous week. Briggs was the sort of man who required a hearing for his brutality. Around 10, Silas stopped, waited while FT away. Briggs had to catch a glimpse of him. Standing there, and when he did, a change occurred in the expression of the deputy. Perhaps it was the in which Silas carried himself. Or perhaps it was Briggs had something in his eyes, but stood up and let his hand astray, in the direction of his firearm. All right, if it's not Briggs, said the words the hermit rancher. Enough to be heard by the expanding audience. What brings you to town, Ward? At last prepared to socialize. I came to speak with the words about Mercy Whitmore, fell like stones into the morning air, into water that is still. Briggs' expression went through a variety of terms. Surprise, computation, followed by a sluggish, unsightly smile. I'm not sure who you're referring to, Briggs said. However, his eyes had become hard and level. I believe you do. Silas took a step closer. You seem to know her well. Okay. Now the audience was expanding, attracted by the crackling tension between the two men. Silas sensed that they were watching him. Could hear the talk being whispered, launching. Excellent. He sought witnesses. For this, you have something to say to Ward Me. You should be straightforward. With his hand now resting, Briggs growled freely on his rifle handle. Silas glanced around at the faces that had gathered. Farmers, store owners, and spouses with kids snooping around behind their skirts. These individuals had lived with Briggs' violence for years as well, too scared or helpless to take action concerning it. I'm stating that you've since harming one of my employees, Silas stated, his voice plainly audible in the morning air. According to me, you're a coward who preys on others with his badge, those unable to defend themselves. The throng fell silent. The horses even appeared to feel the strain, nervously stamping at the points where they hitch. The face of Briggs became purple, then red. That's a grave charge, Ward. You have any evidence of the falsehoods you're propagating? Silas dug into the pocket of his waistcoat and took out a piece of folded paper. I actually do. The page was empty. Simply he had taken something from his desk prior to departing from the ranch. However, Briggs was unaware of that. Additionally, the manner in which the deputy fixed his gaze on it and informed Silas all the information he required for how the man was truly guilty. Look, there's something concerning secrets, Silas remarked, slowly unfolding the paper. Is that they have a way of surfacing when unexpectedly? Briggs drew his firearm. The firearm appeared quickly, but Silas was already in motion. Ranch job. For 15 years had bestowed upon him mountain-like reflexes. Feline, and this was the moment he had been anticipating, because he had entered the town on foot. He plunged to Briggs, pulled the trigger on the left. Past his ear, the bullet whimpering to the wooden pillar behind him was splintered. The multitude dispersed like frightened birds, but rolling to his feet, Silas charged. Briggs attempted to shoot his rifle for when Silas' shoulder caught, and the second shot him in the middle, pushing both of them back against the wall of the saloon with sufficient force to make the windows tremble. They fought for the firearm. Briggs's profanity and as he attempted to bring it to bear. However, Silas had dedicated his life to lugging timber and wrangling cattle, and years of honest work had made his hands iron. Briggs' wrist was twisted by him until the deputy let out a cry and let go of the weapon. The firearm flicked across the timber walkway and stopped close to the Marshal Kane's boots, who had arrived running when they hear gunshots. Kane was more senior than Briggs Grayer, possessing the sort of calm eyes that had also observed a lot to be easily duped. "That's sufficient," Kane yelled, brandishing his own firearm but pointing to the floor. "You two take a step back." Briggs was freed by Silas, who raised his hands, panting heavily. The deputy leaning on the wall and holding onto his wrist and giving a hateful glare. He snarling, "Briggs attacked me. Attempted to murder me. Take him into custody." However, Marshal Kane was observing the dispersed throng, observing their faces. These were individuals who had been terrified of Vernon Briggs since too much time. And now there was a change. Finally, someone had gotten to their feet. "Is that accurate?" Kane asked the gathering residents of the town. Deputy Briggs was attacked by this individual without why. An awkward quiet spanned the roadway. Next, an old woman stepped carefully ahead. Mrs. Henderson was in charge of the boarding home. "Marshal," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "I believe there are certain things you should be aware of. Your deputy, don't pay attention to her." Briggs spit. "She is insane." "They're all insane." Now, however, more voices were joining. The blacksmith mentioned that Briggs had threatened his daughter after she refused to take his approaches. A businessman informed about the missing money from his till following Briggs' search his store. One narrative after another, each one depicting a man who had utilized his badge as an instrument to combat the very those he was meant to defend. Marshal Kane's expression darkened as he every discovery. When the residents of the town, he finally stopped talking and turned to face Briggs, with a feeling of repulsion. "Vernon," he whispered, "you should probably inform me, Whitmore, about this kindness." "I'm not sure, Annie, don't." Kane's voice was clear. "The protests of Briggs are like a blade. Avoid lying. To me, no more." Silas took a step, moving ahead while holding his hands visible. "Marshal, a young lady is here." "Who has been employed at my property, and for months. Your deputy frightened you. Her bruises tell a tale, don't they?" A good man ought to have to listen. Kane Silas was studied for a long time. Everybody in the area was familiar with Ward's reputation. A man who fulfilled his commitments, and he kept to himself. If he was, it meant something important to speak up. According to Kane, these are serious charges, at last. "They're lies," yelled Briggs, but there was urgency in his voice. "These folks are unbelievable over appointed officer." At that point, Silas retrieved the actual proof he had been preserving. The ripped cloth he discovered next to Mercy's cabin, the cloth that complemented the shirt Briggs had on. Currently, he had discovered that Briggs was indoors in the morning, and now he displayed it for all to see. After examining the fabric, Marshal Kane at Silas, then back at Briggs' shirt. When he spoke, there was a lot of the weight of justice that was postponed too long. "You're under arrest, Vernon Briggs." The door of the detention cell clanged behind it. Vernon Briggs made a noise that appeared to reverberate across the whole town. The key was turned by Marshal Kane, using carefully, after which it was hanged on the hook behind his desk, where everyone the former deputy sat on it, observing it. His head in his hands, the slender bunk recognizing at last that his rule of the fear had passed. "I'll need you to send to town tomorrow, Miss Whitmore," Kane stated to Silas while they were outside the jail. "She must provide her statement." "Formally," Silas nodded. "She be here. How about Ward?" Kane's grizzled face was serious. "Ungrateful. I ought to have observed what was taking place. Ought to have prevented it earlier." "All of us should have," answered Silas, but it halted presently. The return trip to the property provided Silas's time to reflect on what transpired. Mercy would then require time to recuperate. It was time to believe she was safe. However, she'd for the first time in months be free from dread when sleeping. He discovered her sitting on her cabin's porch, gazing toward the mountains. Seems was initially observing them. When as she heard his horse get near, she slowly rose to her feet, her face full of inquiries she was hesitant to make. "It's completed," Silas uttered plainly as he dismounted. "Briggs is incarcerated. He refuses to no longer troubling you or anybody else." Mercy sat down after her knees failed her. Difficult on the porch steps. For a while, Silas feared she might pass out. Then not the silent, helpless ones, but tears. He had witnessed tears before, but the type of tears that erase months of accumulated suffering and anxiety. "I am unable to believe that," she said in a whisper. I believed he would." "Always you were mistaken," Silas murmured softly. "There are moments when it just only wants someone who is prepared to stand up and enough to say." They sat in cozy quiet as the sun started to set. The sky, depicting the mountains in scarlet and gold hues, the ranch felt different now, somewhat tranquil. Mercy's arrival has prevented the gloom hanging over them, was gone at last. "What comes next?" Mercy asked. Silas thought about it. "You heal now. You now recall what it's like to be secure. Additionally, if you'd want, there is always work to be done here. Someone who is prepared to act honorably and let folks know what happened if they inquire." Silas said, "Ask. Truth has a way of spreading more quickly than lies after they've begun." When the stars first emerged and as the sky became darker, Mercy Whitmore grinned. For the first time in several months. Little, hesitant, and frail smile, but moreover for Silas Ward, who'd never been a big fan of extravagant displays, or that smile was worth the flowery words each chance he had taken. Occasionally, the most significant conflicts were fought. Not armed forces or firearms, but with the straightforward having the guts to stand when standing most important, and occasionally when the silent rancher at last spoke up. His voice has the ability to tremble the truth, which is the basis of justice itself, had released them both. If you like this tale, be sure you click the video on your screen now to view another enduring story in which honor and courage clashes in unexpected ways. Anticipated, remember to subscribe and think of a super chat to assist us in delivering more tales like these to you. Your assistance is greatly appreciated.